Dear professors, presenters, students, and members of the organizing committee, we have reached the zenith of our conference. Time has come for us to have our closing talk that will be brought to us by Professor Sebastião Alves Teixeira Lopes. Professor Lopes has a diploma in English language and literature from the Federal University of Piauí. He holds a master's degree in language and literature from the Federal University of Santa Catarina and a PhD in English language and British and North American literature from the University of São Paulo. Professor Lopes is interested in language, most emphatically in modern foreign literatures, focusing on such subjects as post-colonial literature, teaching of literature, Salman Rushdie, issues of identity, and Shakespeare. And tonight he will be presenting the following talk, American Relocations of Shakespeare's The Tempest. Professor Lopes, the floor is yours.
Obrigado, Israel. Bom, antes de tudo, eu gostaria de agradecer o convite, a honra de fazer a palestra de encerramento deste primeiro evento, né, entre o Piauí e Iowa. Espero que seja o primeiro de muitos. Agradecer a organização do evento e a coordenação do programa por toda a estrutura, né, que possibilita tudo isso. Eu perguntei ao professor Israel se seria melhor eu falar em português ou inglês. Ele sugeriu que fosse inglês. O Josivan também, né, acaba de falar, né, da possibilidade de uma maior repercussão se eu falar em inglês. Então, eu vou seguir esses dois conselhos e falar em inglês, fazer minha apresentação em inglês, mas claro que em qualquer momento a gente pode recorrer também ao português. The title of my presentation is American Literary Relocations of Shakespeare's The Tempest. I've been working with The Tempest for something like 30 years, and there is a lot to do with the issue of Shakespeare somehow being related to the early colonization of America in the Tempest, especially with the character of Caliban. And I would like to share with you some notes on what I've seen for this whole period. First of all, let me take a closer look in some of the terms I'm using, especially, of course, relocations. But starting with American, of course, I'm making reference to the three Americas. It's also important to say that these strains of readings did not necessarily originated in the Americas, or that they do not keep a fruitful dialogue with readings and trends produced in other places, in other continents. Yeah, we have a close dialogue with the readings produced in Europe, in Africa, and elsewhere. So we're not isolated, but anyway, my focus will be on literary relocations produced by men and women in the Americas. When I say literary, I know that I always betray myself. I started speaking of literary relocations, but end up speaking of cinema, painting, music, and visual arts. So if I do the same here again, forgive me, but it's almost impossible yet to be speaking of literature and not making reference of how these resignifications of the Tempest and how they appear in other forms of art, yeah? So I may be speaking of these forms of art too, I don't know. The terms related to what I'm trying to speak about. First of all, relocations. If I want to be well understood. I'm speaking of rewritings of Shakespeare's The Tempest. If I use the term rewriting, I am understood immediately by non-professionals, by students, by everyone. But at the same time, rewriting is too general for the phenomena I wanted to address, as well as some other terms I would like to be sharing a few that somehow are used for describing the phenomena I'm trying to address here and calling it uh, relocations, yeah? But at the same time, they do not say exactly what I want, or they are too general, like the term rewriting itself. So another term commonly used is adaptation, especially if you think of Aimé Césaire in his famous In Tempête, when he says he has made an adaptation of Shakespeare's The Tempest for a black theater, what he calls adaptation pour un théâtre nègre. I really do not like the term adaptation, yeah, because it seems that uh, the previous text to be adapted is more important than the adaptation itself. That is simply a way of using this text for directing it to a specific audience, a children audience, for example, here as the example using MSZ, a black audience. But this is not the case, yeah, including it's not the case for Césaire himself, yeah. He has not made only an adaptation of The Tempest to a black theater. He has done more than that. He has rewritten The Tempest, he has included a lot of important issues, a lot of important aspects related to colonialism in the middle of the 20th century, which cannot be only addressed as adaptation. So I think even Césaire should not be read as adaptation. Other general terms like reading, interpretation, resignification, they are quite correct in the same way that rewriting is also corrected, but they are too general. Again, they do not say much, yeah? To say that it's rereading does not say much. To say that it's resignification does not say much. Another term which is widely used is translation. Translation in a wider sense of the word, yeah? Not only translate one text from one language to another language, but translating in a wider sense, something like cultural translation. And this is already interesting, yeah, because this cultural translation does interest us a lot, yeah. So this is more or less what these authors are doing, yeah, these American men and women who are dealing with the Tempest are doing, yeah, they are bringing the Tempest from a culture, from a place which is not theirs, and at the same time they are translating it to their own culture, to their own specific purposes. So the notion of translation is quite okay. It does bring some important aspects of what I'm trying to cope with. But I still prefer another term, yeah. Another term I would like to be speaking of is influence, which is a term widely related to Harriet Bloom, of course, when he speaks of the anguish and anxiety of writing after Shakespeare. What to say after Shakespeare, yeah? How to say something statically after Shakespeare. So this anguish and this anxiety of writing after Shakespeare has somehow been worked for dealing with this phenomenon of the rewritings, not only of Shakespeare, but any writing produced after Shakespeare. This is quite a good concept, but still, it does not go to the focus I wanna make. Yeah, Rushdie, Salman Rushdie has also suggested the term palimpsest, which is somehow what we have here. Text is produced over texts. Yeah, you have a kind of layers of texts. And this is more or less the phenomenon we are trying to address here. But again, saying that only seems to be a little bit too general for understanding, yeah, theoretically what we're dealing with. Another term used quite often is creative response. This is interesting because it focuses on one aspect of this production, that it's creative, that is a literary production, yeah? And of course, it's closely related to the reader's response theory, linked to names such as Stanley Fish, Wolfgang Iser, Hans Robert Thiels, of course. And I like it. I like it because it emphasizes the aspect of the process, the creative process, how literary texts are made. Yeah, these are not only responses, but they are creative responses. These are literary texts in response to a previous one, which is The Tempest. Yeah. Again, as all the others terms, before, the notion of creative response puts light in this aspect, which seems to be important. Yeah. And one I used quite a lot in these years studying rewritings of The Tempest is the term appropriation. The term appropriation is important because it has this notion of something yours, taking possession of something, yeah, which is not yours, yeah. And this possession can be even in terms of copyright. Of course, Shakespeare has no copyright anymore, yeah. But we can speak in this sense of copyright, yeah. You have a previous text which is not yours, The Tempest, for example, and you make it yours, yeah. So this sense of appropriation is quite interesting. But it's also quite interesting in terms of cultural imperialism, yeah, because it reveals a process of imposition, yeah, of cultural imposition. And this is also important, yeah, for what we are going to be dealing. Yeah, so you have this appropriation as a result of a process of imperial oppression, of imperial and colonization, of imperialism and colonization. I could also be using more technical terms, like I'm here going to use for beginning, yeah, this series of technical terms. I'm going to use a kind of Bakhtinian glossary. I may be speaking of dialogism, heteroglossia, polyphony, intertextuality. So this Bakhtinian glossary, it says a lot of what we're dealing with, yeah? You have texts put in dialogue. At the same time, you have a polyphonic text, yeah, because you have many voices. You have Shakespeare speaking, and you have another author is speaking over it. And of course, you have intertextuality, yeah, a intertextual relationship between the two texts, yeah. Again, they do say a lot about the phenomenon I'm trying to address, but they still don't say much. Yeah, I think there is still the possibility of saying more than these terms can do. Another term, parody, suggested by Lyndon Hunter, yeah, parody goes a lot with the notion of intertextuality, yeah. A text making a parody of another one, yeah. So let me say, as the example we have here, different texts making parody of Shakespeare's The Tempest. Another very, very interesting term is contrapuntal writing or contrapuntal reading, suggested by Edward Said. This is interesting because it puts the notion of a response. Texts being written in a response to other texts, or in a broader sense, cultural artifacts being produced in response to previous artifacts, yeah? And this response is also important for us because it's ideological guide. It is ideologically guided, yeah? You have a response somehow to history, yeah, to a history of colonization, to a history of imperialism. So this notion of responding to with Edward Said implies in his conception of contrapuntal writing is also important for us. There is another technical terms which I don't like a lot, which is the notion of hypotext and hypertext. Hypotext meaning the previous text, the tempest, for example, and hypertext meaning the new text. Yeah, let me say it this way. So this dichotomy between what is previous and what is now made, it seems that it keeps a sense of hierarchy between the previous and the new text. Yeah, so this is not fair, yeah, because the new text is a literary artifact in itself, yeah, is an object of art in itself, yeah. The notion of hypertext may also be misguiding in the sense that we have a notion of hypertext implying a linked text, that kind of text which was enabled by the advancement of technology, especially by the advance of internet. So when you speak of hypertext, it seems to me that you address almost immediately to this notion of linked text enabled by the advance of internet. So it seems to be a little confusing using it for example, describing what I'm here trying to address to, which are the rewritings of the Tempest, yeah? So I have spoken somehow of these many possibilities, theoretical possibilities of addressing this phenomena, yeah, of rewriting canonical texts. But I'm using relocations of Shakespeare's The Tempest. And now, why relocation? Why I prefer relocation? Well, I'm widely influenced by Homi Bhabha in his The Location of Culture. In The Location of Culture, Bhabha presupposes a lot of interesting things. First, the notion of frontier not as an ending, but as a beginning, or the frontiers, the possibility for something new. So we know that Bhabha makes a lot of his cultural criticism based on the idea of the immigrant, yeah, on his own experience as immigrant. And his own personal experience is very important for the construction of his theory of culture. But you see, this frontier as possibility for the new, as he says, borrowing from Salman Rushdie, for the possibility for newness entering the world. This is a lot important for us, yeah, because we are dealing with this notion of frontiers, yeah, bringing a text from one place to another place, yeah, from one culture to another culture, from one ideological historical moment to another moment with another ideology. So this notion of going beyond frontiers is important for us. And again, not as an end, but as the possibility for the new to arise, for the new to be constructed. Uh, Baba also brings the notion of living in the beyond not as a new horizon, not an abandonment of the past. So we would believe in a transit and uh, uh, full of disorientation moment in which space and time intersect in order to produce complex images of difference and identity. Yeah, this is Omibaba, of course. Uh, this notion of paying attention to the intersection of time and space, Baba brings from Bakhtin with the notion of chronotope. And this is going to be important for us, yeah, because we're going to be dealing firstly with this time and the space references, yeah. We're bringing a text from a different time to another time, yeah. It may be today, it may be in the past, but anyway, another time. And we are also bringing the text from one geography, from Europe, to another geographies, yeah, to other geographies, yeah. We're putting this text in the face of another locality, yeah, and geographical locality and cultural locality, of course. So this notion of paying attention, yeah, to this chronotope, yeah, to this intersection of time and space is also going to be very important for us. Remembering that even us, yeah, even we that are living in our countries, yeah, that we are not immigrants or something like that, but we are the result of a past of diaspora, as well as we are the result of a present of globalization. And this sense of past diaspora and present globalization make modern subjects feel in transit, even at home. So we know that Baba has experienced the a life as an immigrant, but this in between us, yeah, this idea of living beyond can be perceived by those who have not emigrated, yeah. So we are in a sense of disorientation, even if we do not leave our own home. Another important issue brought by Baba is that class and gender are not the only source of identity guiding ourselves today. We have an explosion of identitary sources. Let me say some, yeah. Just for example, we can speak of race, gender, sexual orientation, generation, geopolitical origin, locus of enunciation, and all these sources of identity are somehow helping producing our sense of self. So there was a time we were mostly identified when we had our class and gender explained. Now it's not enough, yeah? We have an explosion of different sources of identification, and these should be examined when dealing, yeah, with the notion of the modern self. So now we come to a very important question, yeah, regarding these many identities which are guiding our notion of self. Yeah, in the face of such a fragmented subject, how to construct collective identities, especially a sense of nationness. This is quite important, yeah, because nation is going to be formed by individuals, not individuals, this is the wrong word, by subjects with internal identity divisions, even internal conflicting identities. So how to make any sense of collective identity, and especially how to make sense of a nation. And I'm speaking of nation, yeah, because most of post-colonial literature endeavors precisely in establishing a sense of nationality. Yeah, so this is quite important for these literatures produced in the so-called colonized world. Yeah, so keeping in mind that yeah, that at the same time we are divided by internal identities, by by these so many identities within, we are also asked collectively to produce a kind of collective identity. Yeah. So how this work is also interesting. Yeah. So these are the basic ideas I take from Baba for using the term relocation. Yeah. For describing this phenomenon I'm trying to address too, which are these rewriting of the tempest. Yeah. So to summarize, I would like to say that we are paying attention to 5 aspects. So this is when I'm in class, this is the kind of things I say to my students. Okay, guys, if you want to address to these rewritings of the tempest, to try to look for these 5 aspects, which are somehow in close dialogue with the premises I took from Ami Baba. First, history. Look at the history of the historical context the 2 narratives are in. Because you see, yeah, and to have a translation from one historical moment to another, yeah. So try to understand the historical context, yeah. This is one first thing. The other thing has to do with geography. Try to understand where this new narrative is inserted, yeah. And of course, when I speak of history and geography, I go back to the notion of chronotope established by Bakhtin and used by Baba in uh, uh, theorizing about the location of culture. I also do like students to pay attention to the social cultural aspects. Yeah, we are dealing with the notion of cultural translation. Yeah, and there was a culture before and there was a culture now. Yeah, so what are the cultural implications for these new narratives? Yeah, to be used in the tempest. Yeah. Uh, and another aspect of this social cultural context is that quite often these narratives are going to be dealing with social conflicts. So this is what Edward Said has called narratives of the storm, narratives of conflict. And this is quite interesting, yeah, because I do agree with him, yeah. Great literary texts are able to address to important social conflicts, yeah. And it's a good idea to be paying attention, yeah, to these social conflicts in terms of identity, in terms of politics, in terms of cultural expression, in terms of so many things, yeah, in terms of origin, yeah. We have a lot of social conflicts which can be represented by these narratives, and it's a good idea to pay attention to the social conflicts. The third aspect is identity. So pay attention to who were the subjects involved in the narrative before, yeah, in the Tempest, for example. And now pay attention to the subjects involved in this narrative now. Are they the same? Are there the inclusion of new personalities, yeah, of new characters implying new identities, yeah? Old characters are resignified. So these are important points to look at, yeah, when dealing with this issue of translating one text from one culture to another culture, taking a text from one place and putting it in another one, yeah. So pay attention to the subjects involved in the process. And a last one, but important, of course, is ideality. It's very important to pay attention to ideality. Quite often, most of the time, I would say there is a shift, an important shift in ideality. Yeah? And we can go back to contrapuntal response as suggested, the notion of contrapuntal response as suggested by Edward Said. Yeah? So if a text is produced in response to another one, so there is a conflict of ideology quite often, yeah? So try to perceive, yeah, this conflict of ideology. It's going to help a lot understanding this new text, yeah? And when I speak of ideology, I speak of different ideologies, yeah? Colonization, patriarchy, racism. The number is immense, yeah? So these are the things normally we pay attention to when dealing with the notion of relocation, yeah? Relocating these texts, yeah? Here precisely is speaking of the tempest, yeah? How the tempest was relocated through the centuries, yeah? Final remarks in this theoretical introduction, yeah? Oh, why the tempest? Yeah, why the tempest has called my attention? We have so many canonical texts, yeah? Why the tempest? Why Shakespeare? First, I have explained before, yeah? The tempest has a lot to do with America. At least we can understand like that, yeah? We have references to the American. We have the use of Montaigne's essay sur le cannibale. We have a reference to Caliban, which may be an anagram of cannibal. So these allusions, we have the allusion to the Bermuda, this kind of New World allusions we know of. So the tempest somehow is related to us Americans, yeah? So it makes us somehow identified with the text. Another point is that the tempest has the greater diversity in terms of criticism. No other Shakespearean text is read in such different ways as the Tempest. It's amazing, yeah? The Tempest can be read in almost every way you want. So this is also interesting, yeah, because as well as it can be read in so many different ways, it can be criticized in so many different ways, we can see that it can be interpreted and relocated in so many different ways too. So this is also interesting. This diversity of perspective is very interesting. Okay, if you allow me to speak a little bit of some of these relocations, guys, I have made a list of something like 300 of relocations of the tempest, of rewritings of the tempest. Of course, I won't be speaking here of these 300 texts. I am going to be speaking about a few of them. But I'd like to say, despite this huge list, I'm quite sure it's only the tip of the iceberg. I'm quite sure there are so many others, yeah? So the list is immense. We have the possibility for researching many others for sure, yeah? So I will now be speaking of some of these relocation very fastly in American, of course, yeah? It has started as far as I could grasp, yeah, in my research. It all started with women writers in the United States, and I'm thinking of Margaret Fuller when she wrote The Great Lawsuit, for example, and those women in the 19th century. I'm thinking of Charlotte Barnes when she wrote The Forest Princess. Let me speak a little bit of this. For example, in The Great Lawsuit is important because we have a Margaret Fuller quite interested in female issues, yeah? So we can call her maybe a feminist, yeah? A feminist from the 19th century, but a feminist. So she was trying to struggle for equality for all people. And as she lived in a period of slavery, yeah, this equality for all people meant especially women and blacks, enslaved blacks, yeah, of course, yeah. And she even saw the relationship between how women were treated and how the blacks, the enslaved blacks, were treated, yeah. So this is more or less the point of Margaret Fuller, and she uses the Tempest to address to these topics. Charlotte Barnes has a text entitled The Forest Princess, and she makes a cut of Pocahontas Miranda. And it's a quite paradoxical moment, yeah? Because you see, you have this necessity, this romantic necessity to go back to the past in search of an identity, in search of a national identity. And this quest for a national identity would take back to the indigenous population, yeah, to the First Nation peoples. But at the same time, these First Nation people were or being exterminated or being removed. Yeah, so you have this paradoxical moment of identifying the indigenous people, a symbol of a national identity, and at the same time a social politics of removing or even exterminating these populations, yeah. But anyway, yeah, she made her the Forest Princess, and she puts Miranda from the Tempest in a kind of Pocahontas role. I want to be chronologically. Yeah, I'm going to follow this issue of feminism, if I can say. Yeah, this issue of paying attention to gender a little bit. Then I go back in time. Yeah, I can speak of Harriet Beecher Stowe. Of course, she's famous for Uncle Tom's Cabin. Yeah, we know this text quite a lot. But I'm speaking of another novel, yeah, The Minister's Wooing, yeah, which is a historical novel placed in New England. It's somehow similar to the Scarlet Letter by Daniel Hawthorne, yeah. We see the similarities in this minister wooing women, yeah. But anyway, we have allusions in this text to a Prosper-like figure, which is precisely the minister, yeah, which is a character in the novel, Aaron Barr. This Aaron Barr, the character, would be the grandson of Jonathan Edwards himself, yeah, the great preacher, yeah, we know of him, yeah, the great Calvinist preacher. So once putting a grandson of Jonathan Edwards in the novel, yeah, she has the opportunity, still has the opportunity to criticize, yeah, this Calvinist society, yeah, this Calvinist fanaticism. And so at this moment, we have a kind of novel that intersect a struggle for power, religion, yeah, religious issues, especially related to Calvinism, and sexuality, yeah, the same way that Hawthorne has done in the Scarlet Letter. Another woman writer that has addressed the Tempest was Louisa May Alcott. Again, she's famous for Little Women. Yeah? We know her novel Little Women quite a lot. Yeah? But I'm speaking of a short story called Ariel, a Legend of the Lighthouse. And there is also a novel very difficult to find. I couldn't find it so far, yeah, which is entitled A Modern Mephistopheles, or The Long-Loved Chase. It seems that she has published, if she has published under another name, yeah. But anyway, in these two texts, she makes allusion to the Tempest. She puts a Miranda, but interesting that she puts in Ariel a female Ariel. And this Ariel is going to behave like Miranda, yeah? She does not use Miranda herself, yeah? In the first one, Ariel and a Legend of the Lighthouse, but she's going to be using a female Ariel behaving like a Miranda, in the sense that is a woman certain for her place in a patriarchal society. This kind of issues we are normally associating with Miranda, yeah, that we can perceive in Louisa May Alcott's novels. A short story in this case, yeah, one short story. So I have begun with this woman, yeah, these women. They were the first to use, since the very first one, yeah, which was Margaret Fuller, yeah. They have been using female characters, yeah, addressing images from the Tempest to precisely contextualize the position of women in the US society of the 19th century. Now I should be addressing another trend of readings, which has a lot to do with Latin American cultural identity and politics in relation to the US. But I would like to leave this for a second moment because I'll have the possibility to make a link of the shift this perspective is going to take, yeah? So let me speak of other small trends of reading these texts, yeah? For example, especially in Brazil, I have found a trend of relating the Tempest to a dichotomy between virtue and vice, between a virtuous Ariel and a vicious Caliban. So this conflict between virtue and vice is going to be found in Brazilian authors such as Álvares Josivan in A Lira dos 20 Anos and O Banquete de Caliban. We're going to see it in Machado de Assis, in small texts by Machado de Assis, especially poems and chronicles. And we're going to see it in Coelho Neto in a book I was not able to find. I'm looking for this book desperately, but I was not able to find it yet. So I know of it because I have read criticism on it, and it goes in this direction. Yeah, it's called Caliban's Diaries, Os Diários de Caliban. I don't know if there is a translated to English, maybe not. Yeah. So this book, Os Diários de Caliban, O Diário de Caliban, goes in this direction. Yeah. These are more or less pornographic short story, yeah, full of sexual images, and it goes in the direction of this special life Caliban would take in the Carioca society, in the society of the province of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Another trend I would like to speak fastly about is the notion of meta-language. Yeah, this is quite important. Yeah, because you see, the Tempest is read. It was more read in terms of a kind of farewell by Shakespeare from the stage. So there is this idea that the Tempest relates to the theater itself. Yeah, it's a quite interesting reading. Yeah, and it has created this trend of relating the Tempest to meta-language, yeah, to a text dealing with literature itself or dealing with theater itself. And this trend we can see, for example, in a text by James Russell Lowell, A Fable for Critics. This is amazing, yeah? Because he's going to use the Tempest to satirize the literary figures of the time. Figures like Ralph Waldo Emerson, James Cooper, even Edgar Allan Poe, and many others, of course. Yeah. So this is amazing, yeah, because it's a way of using the Tempest for ironizing, for dealing with the literary figures of the moment. Yeah. This trend is also going to be addressed much later by Margaret Lawrence, yeah, the huge Canadian writer, yeah, when she says that she is writing a book on Prosperous Child, yeah, and when she says she's writing a book on Miranda, yeah, on Prosperous Child, she's also writing about herself, but in a metalinguistic way, yeah, that she's writing about how she came to become a writer. So we have again this trend of addressing the Tempest for discussing literature itself, yeah, which is amazing. I love this trend. Another one we could be speaking of, I'm going to be giving just an example, yeah. It has to do with science fiction, yeah, because the Tempest has been a lot used for addressing science fiction. And we have a book by Argentinian Eduardo Ladislau Holberg. He has written about what would be a kind of robot using images of the Tempest. Yeah, Calibanus would be the name of the robot. And we have not only this beginning of a trend dealing with science fiction, yeah, like Brave New World, for example, in Europe, of course, in England. And we have this kind of robot, and we can understand the robots as a kind of subgenre of this science fiction, yeah. So you have science fiction in the broader sense and narratives of robots in a narrower sense. It's a trend which appears quite strong in cinema. For example, since the I read classical, The Forbidden Planet, yeah, to Dune, which has just been released in his second version, yeah. We see a lot of elements of the Tempest in Dune. Colonialism present in Dune, yeah. A place being colonized by others, yeah. This kind of colonial readings we can make of the Tempest. Let me go back fastly, yeah, to the one I jumped because it's quite important, yeah, which is to use the Tempest for discussing Latin America, yeah, discussing Latin America in terms of cultural identity and in terms of politics, especially politics regarding the always difficult relationship with the US, especially a US which is beginning to become an empire. Yeah. And there is a huge preoccupation of Latin American intellectuals in this rise of the US as an empire. So maybe the first one I can speak of is, let me find him, is Sarmiento, yeah, Domingo Faustino Sarmiento, in his Facundo, 1945. And in Facundo, he brings the figure of the dictator Facundo Quiroga to speak of a project of a nation, yeah, a project for Argentina, of course, yeah, which would be the choice between civilization and barbarism. And it's quite sad that the allusion that Facundo does with civilization is the European civilization, yeah, in contrast to what he calls barbarism, which be related to indigenous population of Argentina, yeah. And of course, this is a logic which we could see throughout Latin America, yeah. Let's think of one of the most important books in Venezuela called Doña Bárbara, yeah. So this debate, yeah, showing that these nations would have to decide which path to take, yeah, a path to civilization and imitate Europe, or a path to barbarism and go with the indigenous population. Yeah, this is the kind of horrible debate we had at the time. And Facundo using the Tempest to address this debate and positioning himself in favor of civilization, yeah? What he calls civilization, the so-called European civilization. This is going to be quite important for many years in Latin America. Yeah, I can speak of Rubén Dario, for example, from Nicaragua. He wrote many texts using images of the Tempest, but I can say especially El Triunfo de Caliban, in which he shows himself afraid of Caliban, Caliban meaning the United States, yeah, the United States, this new growing empire from the north, which is threatening Latin America, yeah. And he's analyzing the situation of Cuba and Puerto Rico, which were able to quit from the Spanish colonial dominion, but only to fall in the grasp of the United States as this new empire. Other names are important, yeah. Grusak, so many names are important, but I have to speak a little bit of The most important one, maybe José Henrique Rodó from Uruguay. Rodó wrote a book called Ariel, and in this book he was saying quite the same thing, yeah, that we have to worry about the United States as this growing empire. We Latin Americans, yeah, we have to worry about this United States as a growing empire. And at the same time, we have to praise what he considers to be the intellectual and the spiritual achievements of Latin America, which are closely related to Europe, especially France. So we have this kind of belle epoque throughout Latin America in which we see Europe, especially France, as the model to follow, yeah. And as I told you, there is a huge shift in this perspective, yeah, because we can speak of Retama, Fernandez Retama, when he changes what would be the symbol for Latin Americans from Ariel to Caliban. But before arriving in Retama, we have to remember of the French psychologist Octave Manoni, who wrote Prospering Caliban, The Psychology of Colonization. This is a book about Blacks in Madagascar. So it's about Africa, not about Latin America, but it had a huge impact in Latin America, especially because it was widely criticized by a prominent Latin American intellectual, which was Frantz Fanon. So we have Manoni suggesting the idea of a dependence complex when trying to understand the psychology of colonization. Yeah, and this dependence complex is amazing, yeah, because he understands the colonial situation as a kind of complement of two complexes, a superiority complex from the part of the European and a dependence complex from the part of the colonized Africans. And that would explain, yeah, the colonial situation, yeah. This is strongly questioned by Frantz Fanon, yeah, when Frantz Fanon in Peau Noire, Masque Blanc, there is a chapter called the so-called dependence complex of colonized people, yeah, as the title says, making direct allusion to Manoni. And Fanon is going to say that it's simply impossible to understand the colonial situation in terms of these two complexes, yeah. And he calls attention to the fact that these dependence complex does not explain the economic drive for colonialism, yeah, that behind colonialism there is a huge drive for fortune, yeah, or there was an economic drive, yeah, as well as it does not explain how colonialism is supported by a war power. Yeah, it's not a question of two complexes coming together in a complementary way. Yeah, you have a huge war power supporting colonialism, yeah. As well as Fanon says, it does not make justice for native resistance. If these two complexes were in place, how to explain the native resistance, yeah, the many struggles for liberation against colonialism, yeah. But anyway, this shift to look to Caliban as a colonized subject was very important for changing the image Latin American intellectuals had for Caliban that now becomes a symbol for Latin American in the place of Ariel, yeah? So Retama is going to say, now arriving in Retama, yeah? Retama is going to say, okay, Rodolfo was right in grasping who the enemy was, the United States, yeah, as a new empire. But he was wrong in saying that Ariel is our symbol. Our symbol is Caliban. And this Caliban, for representing this colonized subject, this usurped subject, this person who was colonized, as I said, in terms of language, religion, and who is now only able to curse, yeah? The idea of recognizing the situation of colonialism and not necessarily being able to overcome this situation, yeah, is quite present, yeah, in Retama. So with Retama, we had a lot of intellectuals from Latin America saying almost the same, yeah. We have Aimé Césaire stressing that the Tempest is basically a colonial text and that Caliban is the image for Black people in Americas, yeah. We have Braithwaite making a poem. He has written a lot about Caliban, yeah, but there is a specific poem entitled Caliban, which is part of the collection Islands. And in this poem, Caliban, which is dedication to the Cuban people, yeah, he is in a kind of limbo dance, yeah? Limbo dance being the worst position for a human being to be, yeah? Imagine it, we are speaking of the slave ships, yeah? You are the Black enslaved, yeah? Is in a Black ship, and that would be the worst position for a human being. But after passing through this limbo, yeah, he's able to rise. This Caliban is able to rise, and he's able to rise only because of the traces of his culture, yeah, and I'm using Lisson, of course, and because of his religion. Yeah, this is more or less what we have in Césaire too, yeah. I think my time is ending. As I told you, yeah, there are hundreds and hundreds of these relocations, yeah. Let me speak of fastly of how women, I started with women, let me finish with women, are addressing this question of gender using images from the Tempest, yeah. For example, we have Toni Morrison in her novel Tar Baby, which he takes image from the Tempest, yeah, he has a girl, but this Miranda is now a Black girl, yeah, so we have images from the Tempest to discuss gender, but also in terms of race, yeah. This is a huge shift and an important shift, of course, yeah. And I would like to mention Sunit Namjosh. She is born in India, but when she wrote about Caliban in forms of snapshots, she was living in Canada. She was doing her PhD in Canada, and she wrote poems placing Caliban as a lesbian girl. And you see, she was saying, "No, I as a lesbian woman, I do not identify with Miranda because she is white and she is heterosexual, as well as I do not identify with Caliban because he's a man, he's male." So she turns Caliban into a not only girl, but a lesbian girl, yeah? And this is a way of making the Tempest to somehow represent her identity as a colored woman, a lesbian colored woman. Yeah. So this is more or less what I have today. Yeah, these are somehow uh, aspects and examples I would like to share with you. As I told you, the list is immense and it's only the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, there are for sure many, many, many others of these relocations of the tempest out there to be found and researched. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Lopes, for this brilliant talk. I'm sure everybody enjoyed themselves while listening to your words of wisdom and research. I'm very interested in some of the details you shared with us, especially when you mentioned science fiction. I think you spoke directly to me when you mentioned science fiction in that regard as a relocation, possible relocation of the Tempest. And I'd say that the Tempest has become what Abbott calls a master plot, possibly. A master plot is defined by Abbott as a story that has had so much resonance that they have become a sort of base on which other stories are written. And some theorists claim that there aren't any new stories anymore. All stories we have nowadays are actually, using your nomenclature, relocations of past stories. Do you think this is true somehow? You could say that the Tempest has become a kind of master plot, according to Abbott's nomenclature.
Definitely, definitely. Uh, I think even during Shakespeare, there was this idea of relocation. Is yeah, Shakespeare was dealing with previous texts for constructing his The Tempest. Yeah, we know that he used Montaigne, that he used Virgil, that he used the historical pamphlets of the related to the Bermuda incident. So this notion of relocating, yeah, was present even in Shakespeare's time, yeah. In terms of science fiction, for sure, yeah, it's a master plot, as well as it has become a master plot for so many other things, yeah, as I tried to show, yeah, for meta-language, for gender discourses, for discourses in terms of race, and so many other politics, cultural identity, yeah. Uh, Specifically speaking of science fiction, I think it has to do with the science of the time, yeah. The science of the time is quite important. You have navigation, you have the you have a lot of instruments using for enabling navigations. Yeah, you have the constructions of the ship. Yeah, you have powder, you have guns, you have a lot of weapons used directly from the technology. Yeah? And we also have the notion of meeting with the unknown. So you have these two aspects, which I think is quite interesting for science fiction. Yeah, the development of technology, and this technology is praised in the text itself. Yeah, as you have all the importance given to Prosper's books. Yeah, how science is important. Yeah, and you have also this notion of meeting with the unknown. Yeah, and of course the unknown today is the space travel. Yeah, we are always dealing with these new horizons. Yeah, and in this sense, yes, it's a master plot for sure in many ways.
Yeah, I'd say it's safe to say that science fiction is dressed in techne, the talk about technology, but it's still about people. And The Tempest is an awesome story about people and relationship between people, and these things of overcoming obstacles and oppression and fighting oppression. These are very valuable in discussing people and discussing what it is to be human and what it is to feel human or not be respected as humans. So I think that's why The Tempest speaks deeply to authors of science fiction nowadays, possibly.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I've got another question from Lara Ferreira. She says, Professor, do you believe the cause for the volatile nature of the Latin America identity involves that as these islands were finally recognized as new discoveries, the Europeans conceived of them as a menace?
The conception of this newly discovered world, and we have to put this newly discovered among all quotation marks possible, yeah, has been quite different. Yeah, it has been a kind of Edenic new possibility. Yeah, you have this notion of finding these noblemen, yeah, these savages who are pure in nature and living naturally. So a kind of heaven, a kind of new possibility for heavens in earth, as well as you have the other side, yeah, seeing these peoples as savage, as cruel, and as cannibals. So we have this completely different perspective on the indigenous populations of the Americas. Yeah, but the point no one can forget is that it caused a deep, deep impression in Europe. It changed everything in Europe. Yeah, it changed philosophy, it changed religion, it changed sociology, politics. Yeah, and of course, economy. Yeah, because we have even we can say that it's because of this discovery that we have the beginning of capitalism. Yeah, this is an economical debate. I'm not that good in economic, but what I've read, there is this debate. Yeah, trying to position the beginning of capitalism. Yeah, in this beginning of a world trade. Yeah, including of course slavery. Yeah, so it was a huge impact. It was not, it caused very different impressions. Yeah, we cannot say that it was only a menace. For many, it was, but not only that. Yeah, for many, it was also a kind of new possibility. Yeah.
Okay, I don't see any further questions, so I'm sure you will expect a few comments and questions over the week in your inbox, in your email inbox. And I'd like to once again thank you very much for this brilliant talk, Professor Lopes. It has been really a joy to watch you this, which is for me night already, but in Brazil it's still evening. So once again, on behalf of the organizing committee and everyone involved in this conference, I'd like to thank you very much. It was the climax of our conference.
Thank you so much, Israel. I myself, I would like to thank you for the organizers, the coordination of the program, for the possibility to be here. And I'm very glad for being invited. Thank you so much. So much.
Okay, thank you. And thank you who's been watching us these couple of days. I'm afraid this is the end of our conference. And I'm sure we can all agree these past couple of days have been truly productive, instructive, and inspiring. It has been a momentous occasion for our postgraduate program, I must say, despite all the difficulties regarding the circumstances we're currently living through, namely the pandemic. I think it's safe to say that this event has been a great success. Although it is the first event ever organized by UFPI Language and Literature Postgraduate Student Union, we have managed to get together distinguished lecturers from all over the world. We had contributors from the United States of America, from the UK, China, Bangladesh, Ecuador, and Colombia, and of course, from all over Brazil. I'm sure this has been the perfect environment to foster knowledge production and innovation, as well as provoke new practices to emerge concerning the study of language and literature. Now I can only look forward to participating in the next year's event. Before we can conclude, however, I'd like to have Professor Louisa talk to us once more as the coordinator of our postgraduate program. Professor Louisa, please.
Boa noite a todas e todos. Good evening, everybody. Em nome da coordenação do programa de pós-graduação em letras da Universidade Federal do Piauí, on behalf of the program, Postgraduate Program of Language and Literature of Federal University of Piauí, eu gostaria de externar o meu agradecimento, especialmente à comissão organizadora, né, dos alunos, né, dos discentes do nosso programa que prepararam esse evento. I'd like to acknowledge the huge collaboration with our students' union, the real responsibles for this event to be so successful. E convidar a todas e todos para as nossas próximas edições, que eu tenho certeza que virão sim. And to invite you all for our next events that we are absolutely sure that they will come up. E agradecer também aos colegas do nosso curso. I'd like to thank all the deputies of our postgraduate program, e a todos os que assistiram, né, que participaram, seja no Brasil, seja de outros países, and also to thank everybody else who participated as participants, effective as participants or only attendees in Brazil and abroad. Infelizmente, dizer que nós chegamos ao fim dessa edição, mas eu tenho certeza de que todos estamos saindo extremamente satisfeitos com o resultado. And to say that this is the end, unfortunately, it's the end of this first edition of our symposium, but I am sure that everybody here are aware of our successful results. Muito obrigado e até uma próxima oportunidade. Thank you all and see you next year.
Thank you, Professor Oliveira. I'd like to turn the floor now to Professor Gama.
Hi, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Thank you. So, thank you so much, Israel, Josivan, Victoria, Iris Beatriz, for all the students, the postgraduate program students, and also our undergraduate program, undergraduate majors who have helped us. I have to thank especially Iris Beatriz for all you have done here to help us streaming. Okay, this has been, your help has been really amazing. We are very, very thankful to you. I'd like to help on behalf of the postgraduate candidates. I'd like to thank especially Josivan. Thank you for having had this crazy idea of having this event online and for motivating the other students to participate. For me, it has been a great, great joy to be here in these 2 days. I've learned a lot. And I am very, very proud and happy because I have seen that we are able to do something like this, and we can do even better next time. So I hope this happens, okay? And the next occasions we may have more participants, especially from our university. So I hope the ones who were maybe afraid, shy of presenting, okay, in an international event, now see that it is possible and enjoy the opportunity next time. So again, thank you very much for having invited me to participate in this, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Professor Gama. And I'd like to take this opportunity as well to thank and congratulate Josivan, my esteemed colleague, and why not say classmate, for this endeavor. I think you are a very brave and courageous person, and you've shown us what you're capable of. You have been the identity and the driving force behind the stage, in the backstage of this conference, and this has shown us what we are capable of doing. And I'd like to thank you very much for inviting me to host this conference, both at the opening ceremony and now at the closing ceremony. It has been an honor and a splendid experience, I must say. Well, now it's time to really close the event. I'd like to remind you, and actually to invite you to stay longer, because we're going to have following this closing ceremony, we'll have a musical concert performed by my esteemed colleague and friend, Wagner Ribeiro. Wagner Ribeiro is a professor of music from the IFPI Campo Maior campus, and he will be playing for us using his beautiful voice and his talented fingers playing the guitar. Professor Wagner, we're all ears.
Okay, I prefer if you can translate me. I'll sing in Portuguese, and I congratulate everybody here. Good evening. I mean, in Brazil, I can say it now. Professor Luisi, I love to see you here. O nome desta música é Mandaçaia. Mandaçaia é uma abelha nativa brasileira, uma abelha chamada indígena, que não tem ferrão, portanto, ela é uma das responsáveis pela nossa diversidade na natureza. Israel, can you say in English, please?
Yes, but next time use shorter sentences so I can remember everything you said, okay?
Okay.
Okay, the name of this song is Mandaçaia. Mandaçaia is a typical bee kind of Brazil, which doesn't have a sting. And I quite forgot what you said next.
Ok, muito importante para a diversidade é porque essas abelhas nativas, elas são muito responsáveis pela polinização, portanto, uma explicação para a nossa diversidade na natureza, e eu quero que a gente aprenda também, enquanto seres humanos, a ter essa noção de diversidade.
So, you'd say these bees are endemic to our region, right? So okay. They are endemic to our region, Piauí, state in the northeast of Brazil, and they are responsible for the diversity in our flora, and that's why they are very important in our region. And the song will be about them.
Okay, Mandaçaia.
Mandaçaia.
Na florada da mata, os sabores do mel, Jataítiúba, Mandaçaia vem dançar, Manganga é abelha na flor do maracujá. Jataítiúba, Mandaçaia vem dançar, Manganga é abelha na flor do maracujá. Peixe e passarinho podem se amar, e se for assim, onde vão morar? No ar, deixa essas águas e vem voar. No mar, desce os riachos, vem ver o mar. Mangangá é abelha na flor do maracujá, na florada da mata. Os sabores do mel. Jataítiúba, manda saia, vem dançar. Mangangá é abelha na flor do maracujá. Jataítiúba, manda saia, vem dançar. Mangangá é abelha na flor do maracujá. Mangangá é abelha na flor do maracujá. Então, muito tempo eu pensei que o mangangá era um besouro. Até dizem fisicamente que o besouro não foi feito para voar, né? Pela sua dinâmica, parece muito grande. A aerodinâmica não é isso. Só que ela é uma abelha. O mangangá é uma abelha solitária e é a principal, a única, a responsável pelo maracujá. Essas são descobertas que a gente precisa olhar um pouco mais para dentro de nós, da natureza, e entender quem e quais são as funções dessas coisas na vida da gente. Eu vou fazer... Você quer falar, Israel?
Yeah, I can translate what you just said. And for quite some time, I thought manganga was a beetle, and many people say beetles aren't meant to fly. But then I realized manganga is actually a bee, which is solely responsible for the passion fruit of our region. And that should make us think about the diversity and complexity of nature.
Good. I will play now. Eu vou tocar agora um Bumba Meu Boi, que é exatamente um ritmo bem piauiense, e Piauí, onde eu estou, onde muitos de nós estamos aqui, e esse boi, ele é móvel, é um boi que vai para o Maranhão, que vai para o Tocantins, é um boi que percorre o Brasil, e é uma boa lembrança da nossa andança cultural, das nossas festas e rituais na cultura popular.
And I'm going to play Bumba Meu Boi, which is part of the regional folklore of Piauí. And although it is from Piauí, it also moves from state to state. So it goes as far as Maranhão, which is a neighboring state to Piauí, and also to Tocantins, further south of Piauí.
Whole Brazil.
And yes, the whole Brazil, yes.
Ok. Meu boi é do Piauí, é de Parintins, é do Maranhão. Meu boi é do Tocantins, é do norte, é do sul, é de quem tem coração. O meu boi dança reizado, arrasta-pé, dança baião, dança coco, dança samba, embalada e mourão. Afoxé, ciranda e cacuriá, meu boi acabou de chegar pra animar esse salão. Afoxé, ciranda e cacuriá, meu boi acabou de chegar pra animar esse salão. Meu boi é do Piauí, é de Parintins, é do Maranhão. Meu boi é do Tocantins, é do norte, é do sul, é de quem tem coração. O meu boi tem sapateado, catira e maculelê, a roda de São Gonçalo, pastoril, cateretê, marujada, inau, catarineta, meu boi é de desse planeta, Catirina, meu bem-querer, Marujada, Anal, Catarineta, meu boi é desse planeta, Catirina, meu bem-querer, meu boi é do Piauí, é de Parintins, é do Maranhão. Meu boi é do Tocantins, é do Norte, é do Sul, é de quem tem coração. Valeu! Ok. Para encerrar, eu vou fazer um shot. É um ritmo que, inclusive, eu creio que o nome shot Brasil talvez venha de Scott, alguma coisa que certamente vem dessas nossas heranças, que também são muito europeias, né? E esse shot é uma dança, e a temática dessa música é sobre uma lenda muito conhecida no Piauí, chamada Não Se Pode. E é exatamente uma mulher que se transfigurava. Na lenda, ela espanta os homens na época em que os lampiões deveriam ser apagados nas cidades e a noite deveria ser respeitada. Então, faz parte do universo das lendas essa música Não Se Pode.
So now to wrap it up, I'm going to play a song about Não Se Pode, which is a local legend of Piauí about a mythical woman that would scare men on the streets at the time of putting off the street candles, so that they would respect the night.
Yeah, she was very pretty, huh? And then old man come to see, but was a ghost, like
it was a spooky figure.
Ela se esticava até o lampião e se transformava numa figura, enfim, fantástica. Okay?
She would stretch out up to the candle and became a fantastical figure.
Good.
A spooky figure, yeah.
Like this. À meia-noite, sem ser lobisomem, não se pode, é assombração. Ela me pede um cigarro sorrindo, como quem quer pegar na minha mão. Ela me pede o meu fogo sorrindo, mas eu não quero aproximação. À meia-noite, sem ser lobisomem, não se pode, é assombração. Ela me pede um cigarro sorrindo, como quem quer pegar na minha mão. Ela me pede o meu fogo sorrindo, mas eu não quero aproximação. No pé do poste é moça bonita, mas se estica até o lampião. Assusta até os cabra-machos do sertão. Assusta até os cabra-machos do sertão. Não se pode, pode ser que seja uma donzela de bom coração. Não se pode, pode ser que seja desencantada por uma paixão. Não se pode, pode ser que seja talvez a dona do meu coração. À meia-noite, sem ser lobisomem, não se pode, é assombração. Ela me pede um cigarro sorrindo, como quem quer pegar na minha mão. Ela me pede o meu fogo sorrindo, mas eu não quero aproximação. No pé do poste é moça bonita, mas se estica até o lampião. Assusta até os cabra-machos do sertão. Assusta até os cabra-machos do sertão. Não se pode, pode ser que seja uma donzela de bom coração. Não se pode, pode ser que seja desencantada por uma paixão. Não se pode, pode ser que seja talvez a dona do meu coração. Não se pode, pode ser que seja talvez a dona do meu coração. Obrigado, gente. Valeu. Eu espero que um dia a gente possa se encontrar presencialmente para ter esse contato também com a dança, com os nossos ritmos, que nada substitui o calor humano, o suor e esse contato também físico, tá bom? Muito obrigado, professor Israel. pela oportunidade, pelo convite, e um abraço a todos. Professora Beatriz, que está aí comentando, e ao Luizinho, que é uma figura que eu amo muito, e através dele eu transmito o carinho a todos vocês.
Thank you, Wagner. This has been wonderful. What a way to end an event, I must say. You're very talented, of course. You have heard that many times.
Good. I'd like to talk more English with you, but I have no practice for the moment. And
you're modest, man. You're very modest.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you again, Wagner. As I was saying, I'm sure you hear this a lot. You're very talented, and you have not only a talent to play and sing, but to pick the right songs as well. And I think although you hear this a lot, you deserve to hear again and again. So
Okay.
Thank you very much for this performance. And I'm afraid there's nothing left but to say goodbye to you, wish you a good night, and see you next year.
Okay.
Bye.
Josivan, querido, parabéns. Está encerrando. Israel, obrigadíssimo.
Parabéns,
Parabéns a
gente. Excelente, excelente. Agora cada um pega seu vinho, sua cerveja, seu chá inglês.
Seu chá inglês. Eu gostaria. Esse